The October 8, 1981 program of the Newstead Historical Society is being chaired by John Kegabine on the topic Street and Place Names.
Thank you, Gene. Commissioning Gladys Brown, who probably would have done a much better and more thorough job than I have done. I asked all the old people that I came in contact with in the last 3 months about where they lived and when they moved there and what they knew about the street they lived on. So what I pass on to you might be the truth, it might be lies, or it might be the figure of somebody's imagination. But I've got me a list of the streets. Now here are two maps, the map of the village of Akron and the map of the town of Newstead, with the names of the people that lived there in 1980, or in 1880, which is 100 years ago, and they were brought over by Elizabeth Brown, who was put them on stiff paper and that so they won't deteriorate anymore. And you're welcome to look at them after and find out where your ancestors lived, and you can see that in them days some of the streets that we talk about today were not even there. For instance, Hunts Corners Road did not come any further than Draper Road. It didn't come into Akron. The Center Road only came as far as Hicks Road, and a few things like that. Streets in the village, Newton, and some of those only went to John Street. They didn't go all the way through. On the north end of our town, there's a long road called Tonawanda Creek. Some of the roads that I talk about first are just names of roads that go places. Tonawanda Creek Road follows Tonawanda Creek. There's no specific interest in history except that it is named after Tonawanda Creek. It's like Rapids Road. It goes from Akron Road or Maple Road to Rapids. People travel that road, they call it Rapids Road. Same way when you went from Hunts Corners Road to Sand Hill, you went down the Sand Hill Road. And things like that. Most of the roads in our town were named after the first settlers that settled on it. You get in the southern part or the northern part of the town, the Burdick Road, Keltenberg Road, Milan Road, the Berghorn Road, which is also the town line road. There's Berghorns that live on it yet today. Charlie and Ed Berghorn both live there. If you've never seen a historical place, that is one really of interest. Everybody should go there just once. Tell you something about the Berghorns, though. I mean, their mother and their father, and probably the Berghorns before them, banks are made to lend people money for mortgages and that. Many times banks can't see fit to give you money for a mortgage. And in the old days, and not too far old, real estate dealers in town were known to go to Mrs. Berghorn and Charlie Berghorn and say, take the person along, here's the person, this is where they live, but they need $5,000, they need $3,000 and that. Mrs. Berghorn would reach under the mattress and count it out and sign the paper, or Charlie would reach down into that 6 pair of pants that he had on and pull it out, and you had your mortgage. And it was as simple as that. People like that live in our town. Off of Akron Hunts Farmers, or excuse me, off of Akron Lockport Road, which is called Maple Road, and you were here before they built the road from Swift Mills Road back this way, further to Kearney Road. That road was lined with beautiful, beautiful maple trees on both sides, and when they built the road, they took them all down. That's one reason why that was called Maple Road. Off of the Maple Road runs the Meal Road. And everybody knows Harvey Beale at the bank. His grandfather's farm was where Norm Yowsey now farms. That's why that road is called Meal Road. Hunts Corners Road was originally Pork Ridge Road, and probably because the farmers that lived along there grew a lot of pork. But also, one hell of a lot of hunts lived along that road. Hunts Corners Baptist Church, they tell a story about the lady losing her purse in church one day over there, and the old elder got up and said, if somebody lost their purse, he said, Helen Hunt is the treasurer here, she has it, you can go to Helen Hunt for it. Off of the Mule Road runs Downey Road, and Mrs. Casper, who is the editor-in-chief of our Akron Google, was a Downey, and there's been Downeys on that road from day one. There's a few more new houses on it now, but there's still Downeys in two of them. Draper Road is the same way. Runs from I can remember yet, lived where Leighton Snyder lived. After that, it was the Black Locks and like that. We get over into the other corner, north end of the town, we got the Bruning one. And everybody probably knows Carl Bruning. Well, this is Carl Bruning's uncle or his grandfather or something was way down there, next to where Pabst and Hanson's live now. That was the Bruning farm, where Bob Hanson lived. Bruning Road runs from Robinson Bridge into the reservation. Rucker Road started at Akron, Lockport Road, Maple Road, and at one time it went all the way through to the Bruning Road, through the reservation. The Ruckers lived where Dick Campbell's mother lived today. That was the Rucker farm. Moved there about 1830. Franklin Rucker was one of the sons that's still alive, lived down on Kirk Road, and he said when the Kirby's moved down on the other end, and there wasn't too long recently that the Kirby girls died, they were both school teachers, they insisted that from Cedar Street going east into the reservation that be called Kirby Road. Now that road is closed, but the Indians still use it. If you ever have your car borrowed for a ride home some night, you might suggest that the sheriff look down on that road down through the woods and that, where the Indians know the trail, and you might find your car. Quite a few have been found there. Kitzel Road, Mrs. Paff, Kenneth Paff and Glenn Paff's mother was a Kitzel, and that goes way back into the early part. Most of the people moved into this area and got their deeds from the Holland Land Company anytime from 1820 on. Most of them were around 1828, 29, up to 36, and into the early 40s. Martin Road, named after Martin Brothers at the machine shop where the new doctor's office is. There, Benny Kopp lived on the Martin Road, the Bear Farm is there. Kearney Road, everybody knows Jim Kearney, and somebody over here knows Bill Kearney quite well. That's originally John Kearney, and where Jerry Karcher lives, Tim lived on the other side. It's all Kearneys on the Martin Road. The Kearney Road, excuse me. Now, there's a road here that somebody will talk about later, I hope, the Scotland Road. But the only thing I can find about the Scotland Road was all Irishmen on the north end of it. And somebody probably named it Scotland just to tee them off. A small part of the reservation, about a tenth of it, I think, is in the town of Newstead, and the Bruning Road and the Scotland Road, and maybe a little part of another road, or I can't remember, it's the Sky Road or the Sundown Road, what comes through there. This is the only parts of the road in the reservation. At this time, I'd like to call on Herbert Thayer, who knows a lot about the certain east part of the town here, and he will give you his slant on roads and old things that happened up in that area, around that road, five corners and like that. Herbert?
I was thinking just along the same line he was about why roads were named, and I thought there were two things. Either they led to some other place, or they were named after people. And I thought of the different directions around. We spoke about north, Sling Hill, Rapids that way, and then Clarence Center, Hunts Corners west, and we think of south, and South Newstead and Crittenden, and then we're here thinking of the east side. From the five corners, first south is Scotland and north is Crittenden, or the other way around. North is Scotland and south is Crittenden. But there were two, the Indian Falls Road, the Indian Falls, a diagonal, but the one that's straight east, in which I live, now called Knapp Road, was called Pembroke Road. I remembered it from growing up here until I went away to school. And the change, I suppose, was because of Alfred Nick, just a little ways beyond us, just before you come to the Tennessee County line. I'm within a half a mile of the Tennessee County line. But I thought that if we wanted to get an older residence, that it should have been called Flint Road maybe, because Monroe Flint, the founder of the other Flints that is around here, owned property there long before, because my grandfather, Reuben Fair, bought his land after the Civil War from Monroe Flint. And Monroe had a son, Milo, who lived up there beyond us, was a school teacher at the Five Corners. My father went to school there back in the 1870s and 80s. And Milo went to the school teacher. His wife had died, and then his sister Hattie lived with him in the house. And Alfred Knapp married Fanny King, whose father owned the place where they Knapps lived. And they were our neighbors. And growing up, my father grew up with Fanny King, and then so that the King name was older than the Knapp name. Floyd Knapp was years older than I, so we were boys together growing up. And Alfred was the school trustee for the Falkirk district. When I went to school, it wasn't centralized, of course, and they paid so much for the people to come to Akron. And because, I think probably because of his prominence as a school trustee, and it continued on after they centralized, and he was still on the school board, I believe, finally named it after him. But I thought of, the name Knapp, of course, applies to the road. But of course, as you get up farther, Flint's in the other county, and so on, and other names of people up there. I'm reminded of the fact that when Alfred Knapp's wife died in November 1935, they called me to have the funeral. I was just a young minister, and I came back to have the funeral, and I asked Floyd if they had any scripture that they'd like to use, and Knapp didn't go to church anywhere at all. And he picked the passage out from Paul, I fought a good fight, kept the faith, so on. Kind of put me on the spot to use that scripture, like someone who never went to church, you know. And so I got around it by saying what Paul believed, and then I said about Aunt Fan, as I called her, because I went down to the state, and my brother Frosty, some of you know of him, started the airport up there, lives up on Scotland Road. I can remember that because I'm 6 years older than he was, and I stayed at Nashville overnight. But I thought of these incidents that come up about these people, and as I say, I had that funeral, and then my father died just a few months later, and so it was very impressed on my mind, of course. But and some of these other roads that are mentioning, now the Drapers are related to me too, and I'm interested in this map. My grandparents, Perkins, W.O.C. Perkins, lived over there on that Prince Corners Road. My mother was born in 1870, grew up there, and then they moved into town here, and her father owned the block right where the Monroe Street. He had 3 pieces of property in the 1866 map. And I was interested in the property that people own and people and relatives. And the Drapers, he was the first cousin of the Drapers there on Draper Road. Then over on the main road, and that there's a Havens Road, right opposite the cemetery. In that cemetery, there are 11 of my ancestors buried. Over at Elgin Cemetery, my great-great-grandfather, Gideon Draper. We have a Draper monument for a second, third generation. It's there. And right over across here, my mother's parents, W.O.C. Perkins and I, are buried right here. And just a little ways, 2 rods over here, this cemetery. So I'm interested in all of these cemeteries. I have 16 of my ancestors buried right in the township. And I thought of this Havens Road. George W. Havens lived on that road. I think only one, and he was the first cousin of my grandmother, Havens. So some of these roads mean more to me because of these connections with the people that I've known and things along that line. But he spoke about the Scotland Road, and they call it Case, or the hill where my brother lives. And Cases used to own that. My father bought that farm later. And I can remember when he did that. It was 1914, before World War I. And we used to slide down the hill in the wintertime, and the hill wasn't as steep as that. It was that time. And we used to rent the place out. In the summer, Camp Woodside, they called it. We did have some renters there. Someone was asking me just the other day about, I guess, Harold Madison. We lived there in 1926. But someone had typhoid when he did. So these memories come back. Well, I think I don't want to take any more time, but I just thought of these particular roads over the south side. Maybe you're going to do that later, right? So then I'm just doing the east side where I live, that where the main road, of course, is the main route that they came through in the beginning for to the south. That's where most people lived back in the first 1800s. There weren't these crossroads or any kind of road.
Thank you, sir. I've got a few places written down here, and if you're very familiar with them, please don't answer. Let somebody answer who thinks maybe they know. And one of the questions was, where is Case's Hill? Case's Hill is on Scotland Road, and I think at one time it was called Nigger's Hill because probably was the first colored family lived somewhere in that area.
Yeah. Their name, my father rented the place, I was still at home, great, to a man by the name of John Wesley, his wife, and he wasn't a Methodist. He didn't go to church. I remember him killing woodchucks, and he loved to eat woodchucks, and so it helped us when we went to the farm.
Okay, where's Crow Hill? Crow Hill was on Ledge Road, which is now Skyline Drive. Where was the West Shore House? Newstead Tavern. In the old days, very beautiful, with shades over every window and that. When the salesmen got off the train and stayed there overnight, and had their little trunk on like a carry-all with wheels on it that they pulled up the sidewalk. Where was Brick Spence Station? Bricksman. Where the viaduct was on the Peanut Railroad, where the Centennial train started, right? That was Bricksman Station. Eckner's Hotel, where was that? There you go. Where was Weinog's Creamery? First place my dad hauled milk to when they moved to Farnham Road from Grand Island. South Newstead. Okay, Mom. Where's Limerick? What was it? Limerick is actually the small village of small houses and a store where the people lived that worked at the Cummings Cement Works and later at the stone quarry. There was a regular little settlement. Just after you went under the viaduct on Cummings Road, there was a road that went into the right. And as a kid yet, I can remember people. Nick Burr had a store up there. And there was, I think, 12 houses there. The last resident up there was Charlie Light. Many of you should remember him. Maybe. He was quite a character. How many stores were there in Swift's Mills at one time? There was 2. There was also a tannery, a sawmill, and a feed mill that most of us know about. And quite a few houses. Where was Pine City? That's very correct. Where did the Swamp Angels live? On the nice road. There was the Swamp Angels. Where's Parker's Crossing? Crossing where we loaded our milk on peanut track on Farnham Road. Because at one time, the Parkers were a very prominent family. They owned all the land from where Johnny Albright used to farm around the corner and down from Mennonite Church to the other crossing on Clarence Center Road. And Mr. Parker built that house where the Fizz Boxes live today. And you look on the stone on the front, it says C.J. Parker on it. And they and the Howe family are hooked together way back when. Okay. Fisher's Corners. Anybody know where Huffman's hot dog stand is? The Fishers lived on the corner where John Nicholas now owns where the family brick house is. And that's Fisher's Corners. Okay, we'll go by that for a while now. Crittenden Road. Now, I had another helper on this, and she's a little bashful. She doesn't want to come up here in front and talk. She can if she wants to. She doesn't know. Crittenden Road, to her best knowledge, is named after a general in one of our wars, 1812 Revolutionary War. I could find no other history on Crittenden Road. But we'll start up a little further then in Buckwheat Street. And the only reason we can call it Buckwheat Street is because the land was wet and low up there, and all they grew was buckwheat and hay, and they called it Buckwheat Street because the farmers brought their buckwheat down the road. The Doris Road, which runs off of Buckley to the east, was one time called Orchard Street, Orchard Road. But John Dorse, who was George Dorse's father, who many of you can remember had a trucking business in town, changed the name to Dorse Road. South Newstead was originally called the Schwarm Road because old Adam Schwarm was one of the pioneers in South Newstead. And then it was changed to Peter's Corners Road, and it's still Peter's Corners from South Newstead over into Walden, from Tennessee Street. Right? Then it was changed to Ewell Road, E-W-E-L, named after the library, and gave the library in Walden. And lately, in our time, Henry Dye thought that was a political mistake, and they changed it to South Newstead Road. The first Steiner Road was what is now the Shore Road. I talked to Grover Steiner about this, and when Pete Shore moved up there on the left-hand side, the farm was back in, and he decided it ought to be the Shore Road. So the Washington Road was what was originally what we call the Steiner Road now, so they changed the Washington Road to Steiner Road to satisfy the Steiners. There was a million nices up in that area, and that's why we have a nice road. And there's a great many stages. I called the Moral Stage and his wife, they had a definite family, and she was going to come back and relate some history. The stages go back to the Archibald Clark storybook and the Revolutionary and Civil War and all that. I guess the first settlers up here, and there's a James stage from there. They go on from there, and anybody that's got the name stage up there, I think is related and has something to do with the stage road. The Pole Road, which runs off of Buckley Street, to Robert Pole, the first settler. West Wing Road, which is also the Town Line Road. I can remember Henry Lessing lived on the corner of South Newstead and the Stage, and William Lessing lived just past the Mennonite Church and Plant Center, and that goes back into their family. On the other part of Newstead, the Billow Road, Pete Billow lived right where the thruway crosses Billow Road. The Joneses were an Irish family down that way, went into Clarence. The Hiller Farm was the first farm in where Wesley Jones lives now. North Mill Road. North Mill Road is another road that went to a place, Mill Road. Okay, where was Mansfield Corners? Where is it today? Corners and Lapp Road. Named after a general, I think, in the Revolutionary War. Jefferson Krull is related in that family. Jeff Krull and Butch Krull, you all know. They live on the Greenbush Road, called because the bushes were green. Like Bloomingdale, because the fields were blooming, the fields were crossed. Although there was a Bloomingdale family in Akron one time, but people told me that the road was not named after them.
What was East Clarence?
East Clarence is that Salt Road and the Peanut Track, so what's the diamond?
I've been, my mother wrote a diary from 1890 to 93, and she taught school at East Clarence. Came with a tree, Peanut,
down the Clarence Center Road to the Town Line Road, which is about Davison Road. Yeah, we used to load hay and load the salt and everything else at East Clarence with the siding there. Vernon Davison lived at one time on the farm. You come over Clarence Center Road, Town Line Road, which is now Davison, comes up, and if that road was continued, it would go right through the middle of the house. And he traded that farm to George Funky, who owned the business right by the railroad track where Shaw Woods was, where Doug Seidler is now. And then Vernon ran the business there and became town clerk, and he's still there. I went to see him today to get information, but he wasn't home. And let's see. I guess we've gone just about all the way around the town. Yes. In the village. Main Street and Beale Street. There was a Beale family with C. Beale property on there after, named after them. Why Brooklyn Street is Brooklyn Street, I will never find out. Does anybody here know? Did you think we were in the Arc City and like Brooklyn? Yeah, about Westfield or something. Across the creek, I don't know. Chestnut Street because of the chestnut trees. Jackson Street because of Maynard Jackson's family, the cooper shop and everything that was down there. Why it was Mechanic Street, I don't know. That's a mystery to me. That starts at Jackson and goes down to John Street. Mill Street because of the mill down there. The mill race, and as you can still see down there, is where the Village Electric Station used to be. The only reason I can call it John Street is I think they shortened Jonathan Russell and they called it John Street. I don't know. They don't know why it's John Street. It certainly wasn't named after me. Doc Helwig named me. Does anybody remember him? Call him John. That's good enough.
John, on one record, I saw John Street in the lower end, known as Back Street.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. Okay, Cedar Street. When I can pick up the cedar trees. The gentleman we're going to talk to a little later here, I have a book with him, and there's Kipler's, 3 of them, and so that's the name that Kipler was named after that family, and coming road down off of Lewis Road. Lewis Road goes back to Herm Lewis's family, that's where Bill Asmus lives now, and Herm Lewis was the superintendent of the village for a long time. Clinton Street, named after Governor Clinton. Buffalo, because we were put on the way to Buffalo, and you went up Buffalo. Monroe, Madison, Washington, named after presidents. Franklin, after Benjamin Franklin. Can anybody help me with Pearl, please? Pearl, who was it named after? Pardon? Maybe that's, I don't know. I'd like to read you a few excerpts from some village board meetings here. January 10th, 1882, M.L. Homadou presented a map of the village and following streets were approved: Miller Avenue, Churchill, Marshall, Boyd, and Newton. Now, down further here, there is a C.R. Miller in 1883 was elected clerk the ensuing year, and in 1884 they paid him $25 for his services as clerk in 1883. Now, where Miller Avenue is, I don't know. Churchill, Marshall, Boyd, we're all familiar with them. Marshall, named after Marshall Homadou, who was the mayor of this village at one time. His name is in a lot of the records. Here's an interesting thing. Petition granted, this was in September 9th, 1881. Petition granted to Liberty Hose to hang bell and tower of truck house on Clinton near Main Street and retain ownership for 15 years. Another continuation of this street thing. Ainsworth moved that the avenue is laid down on the map presented by M.L. Homadou called Eckerson Avenue be accepted, and that permission be granted to M.L. Homadou to move the said avenue north and south as he could desire. Carried. Not the one from that same meeting. Whereas it having come to the knowledge of the Board of Trustees that a certain fire engine is being stored in the Liberty Hose Hook and Ladder Company's building on Clinton Street, it is resolved that the firemen be instructed to remove the same. Carried. The President reported that the New York West Shore and Buffalo Railway Company had served a notice upon him of their intent to cross the lands of the village. Peanut Railroad was here long before the West Shore was. And here we go on February 28, 1883, Frank Stoddard presented a map of territory laid out into village lots and streets duly named, map placed on file. April 3rd, 1883, Horace A. Wilder presented a map of the village, accepted and placed on file. April 27, 1885, notice to several, including John Eckerson and R.D. Miller, to remove manure piles from their premises. I've done a lot of landing up here. I hope it's been interesting. And now I'm going to introduce to you a gentleman who's a member of this organization. He goes back into the Kriegel Road is named after his great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, way back in the late 1700s, and he also, his mother was a twin. He was born and raised in Akron. He knows a little bit about Akron as a boy, and he can tell you things about the Octagon House. He's going to come up here. He's a Lancaster now. He's a good friend of mine, and he's going to ramble on like I have. And he's done while you've been asking questions. This time, it's a pleasure to present Don Kriegel.
Thank you, John. I'll get over here where people can see me so they can tell whether I'm lying or not. It's not going to be lies. It's going to be, when I was a boy, small boy, I might go sit down, I'm more comfortable. Besides, I had an awful lot of supper tonight. That's another thing that came from Akron. After I grew up, it was breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And when I lived in Akron, it was breakfast, dinner, and supper. So I never knew what dinner and supper meant until later on, until I got out of that.
Creekle Road, naturally named after the Creekle family, and about 40 years ago, my aunt, who lived in Akron at the time, almost 40 years ago, asked me if I would take her to church on Easter in Hunt's Corners. And since she was my favorite aunt, in fact, she was about the only one I had, I couldn't refuse. So I came over Easter morning, and I picked my aunt up, and we went out to Hunt's Corners. And as we got near the church, she says, "Donald," she says, "see that big church over there?" I says, "Yes." She says, "Your great-great-grandfather helped build that church with his horse and wagon, and they took time to build it in their spare time." I said, "That's fine." We got over to the church, and in the churchyard, the cemetery, and she took me into the cemetery. And I saw all the Kriegels were buried over there, and one of them was 1794. So I figured they were pretty old. And 40 years ago, my mind wasn't too much on cemeteries. And the only thing I ever learned wasn't what was told to me by ordinary conversation. It was told to me, it was told and I was listening. And then children were supposed to be seen and not heard. That was the one thing. And the other thing that I learned early in life was a boy is worth a half a man and two boys are worth nothing. I learned that soon, since my ancestors were farmers. I knew how to hitch up a horse, which I showed Frank Shepherd that I knew when I came to the village. He was the man who was Eddie Shepherd's father, and you know, who carried the mail, and of course the wagon from the Peanut and from the West Shore post office. Getting back to Kriegel Road, I did ask a few questions in my young life, and they had a few orchards there. And in the orchard there had been a log cabin lived in by an old lady by the name of Ann Burleson. And my Uncle Jake, whose name was Roy, poor Ann, she couldn't see very good at all, but she still, I believe she came from England, if I'm not mistaken, and she had beautiful cut glassware. And when my Uncle Jake, that was my father's brother, found out that she was going to have company, he'd go over and visit her, and in the course of the visitation, he'd hang all her pictures upside down. And she enjoyed her pictures very much, and when the people would come, she'd be explaining the pictures. Of course, they were looking at them upside down. And naturally, my grandmother, Jake's mother, found out about it, and he got all hairy for doing that. But he kept doing it time and time again. And I remember hearing about my grandfather, how he raised horses and trained them, and each year they'd send one or two teams into Buffalo as fire horses to draw the fire wagons. And every time he went in there, he would visit the horses that he had previously sent in and who had been sent in by his parents. That more or less was the sideline. And they raised a lot of potatoes. There was a horse barn, a cow barn, a tool shed, and a barn for wagons. They had a buggy horse by the name of Rose who could find a way from Akron home without any lights, without anything. Then you could fall asleep and she'd wind up, she'd be standing right in front of the door. This I remember from my grandmother. My grandmother raised turkeys, and that was her spending money. And while playing there as a mere boy once, I crawled into the barn and I came up with a branding iron. It was GC. Well, I took my father, and it was a branding iron that his grandfather had used. So my father's name was George, his father's name was Frank, was my grandfather. My grandfather's father's name was George, and George's father's name was Aaron. Now that takes us back to 1794. Now, I did ask once or twice where the Kriegels came from, and I got a lot of indefinite answers. It seemed as if they came from Holland. How they they got to this part of the country, heavens knows, but they eventually spread out into Lockport and Batavia. And so let's see, now that's quite a few generations back. This farm had been in the family for a good many years, but my own grandfather, he was a gentleman farmer. He believed that if you had 2 hired men, you shouldn't have to do any work yourself, which he doesn't do. And the farm was very productive, and he came to the village. He was previously married, as a young man, took over the farm. He had 3 boys and 1 girl. My aunt, who was the mother of George Roloff, who lives on Cedar Street yet, she was one of the sisters. My father's name was George Raymond. And until my Uncle Ben died, I never knew his name was, I thought his name was Benjamin, instead of that was Benton. And I never knew that until it was on, I saw the tombstone. So. And then there was Roy. And those are the 3 that I can remember, besides my aunt. Now, they were quite active in community affairs, and I remember my aunt telling about when people would be short on money, they'd come over to my grandfather, Frank, and he would sign an ordinary piece of paper, and they'd come to Akron, and they could go to the bank in Akron and get as high as $5 credit for the winter. And he performed the burial services. He didn't ever do any weddings, but he performed the burial services, and a lot of people were buried on their farms in that time that I remember correctly. No, that takes care of the Kriegel Road. When they came to the village, then they became villagers, but they were never quite accepted in the village as villagers because there was a different class of people. You were a farmer or you were a villager. And when other people would get a little bit angry and provoked, with the farmers, they'd say you came to town with dirt in your mouth. Of course, that was really. But later on, my Cedar Street, it seemed to be where I grew up on sugar cookies, molasses cookies, and I just can't remember the other kinds of cookies. Nevertheless, so many things to remember about Murder Creek and the boys that I played with, Raleigh Lace, Norm Connery, Bush Swader. I remember my teacher across the street here in the school was Miss Handy. Her brother, I think, was the dentist here. The principal's name was Boyd. I think Frankie Wilder. Oh, she had to be teaching there because she was my mother's teacher. A lot of you people probably have heard of the people that's telling about. Summer times we used to play around the park. Band concert is gone, the show now, where they used to have them walk upstairs. The fountain was there, yet it's still there today. And Akron was a wonderful place to be. There was an awful nice spirit in town. And as far as I remember, that's about all I know about the Kriegel family. Now, if you want to go over to the Octagon family, the twin family, now, I'm telling you all this from hearsay. Nobody ever sat down and told me this stuff, but I listened. So this is my great-grandfather, Jim Twin. He was born in 1821. His father, just don't rightly know what his name was, but he deserted the English Navy in the War of 1812. He didn't believe in the cause. He was Irish. I guess that's probably why the Irish disliked the English so much. He swam across the Niagara River, walked to Clarence, worked in Clarence for a while, evidently courted my great-great-grandmother, married, and came to Akron. Now, Jim Twin was born in 1821, buried out here in the cemetery. That was his father did all that, so I presume he was born somewhere in 1700. But It's a strange thing. Nobody knew he swam the Niagara River to desert. Years and years later, when Clark twin, who owned the Octagon House, was a young man. He was the United States District Attorney to Alaska. He came home, and the relatives chipped in to send him to England to find out some of the ancestors that the deserter had left over there. Well, shortly after that, he said that he came back and said the Crown had confiscated everything that he had, but nobody ever knew he deserted because he just disappeared. He could have been killed. And he said that because he was a deserter, that they had confiscated everything, but it wasn't too long after that that my uncle was a very rich man. Nobody ever knows whether they bought him off or what happened. But being a lawyer, and as you know, all lawyers are honest, I presume that he did. His trip was successful in some manner speaking. I don't know. That was my supposition. But the Octagon House, as you know, for years I asked, in fact, it was a few years back that I wrote a registered letter to the attorney, Nelson Barrett, to see if something could be done to give up. And he called me on the phone and said that it could be done. The next thing I know, it couldn't be done. The next thing I know, I looked at Bulletin and I read about the pigeons flying in and out of the food ball. And I wrote him a letter that I don't think that he liked very much, but I said that I knew that my ancestors would turn over in the grave if they ever thought that it was being neglected in such a way. I said, I, for one, never wanted anything. Personally, all I wanted to do was see that something that was beautiful and historic be revitalized instead of being torn down for a parking lot or whatever else. Shortly after that, I got word that he decided to give up the Octagon House. I imagine that what I hear, it might well not be given up because it was in such terrible shape. But as a young man, I went through the Octagon House a few times. It was loaded with beautiful antiques, stuffed animals set back in the pictures as if they were in their natural habitat. The Dutch people in those days lived down in what we would call the cellar. It was it's still there. I know I haven't been in a good many years, but they did their cooking in the wintertime, lived in the cellar, so to speak. The windows were waist high. The baking was done in the fireplace, on the side of the fireplace, and the cooking. And I imagine the fireplace was used to heat downstairs there. And I know it would be much too big of a place to heat in the wintertime. And I was told that the cupola, that the lady folk used to go up there in the afternoon and sit and look over the countryside and do their knitting, crocheting, and reading. That's why it has so many windows, I believe. I was up there a few times, and it was a beautiful thing to look at the village on. 22 closed closets supposed to be in there, and I never thought that anybody could use that. But it was an Octagon House in stone. Now, going back all those years, you can understand that there were so many years that naturally there was courting and marriages. So the crowds, the troops, the Cummins, and I can't recall. They were all in America. So I would be shirt-tail relation to about almost anybody who was in Akron 100 years ago. So that's the kind of the village it was. It was very, very nice. And I'm very glad to see that as many people take interest in it as have been taken. Now, I could tell tell you about a lot about my boyhood, how in those days when I was a boy, 8 to 9 years old, as I said before, one boy is worth a half a man, 2 boys are worth nothing. So they didn't let 2 boys get together too often doing work. Because actually did too much school. But when I was about 9 years old, I learned a lesson from my grandfather Twin. Make good cider. Injun like cider. Injun good friend, Jim Twin. And my great-great-grandmother would let them in the back woodshed, which was part of the house. And my grandfather, great-great-great-grandfather, would get the cider jug out, or the cider pitcher out, and they'd have some cider. And I understood from what I heard that he used to go and spend a week or 2 in hunting season and stay right with the Indians. So evidently, it must have been safe because he didn't die being scalped or anything. And but my grandfather taught me probably the most important lesson I ever learned. He gave me a tomato can and a little stick, and I was supposed to pick potato bugs off the potato plant so that they wouldn't eat them and kill them. Well, he gave me 5 cents for a potato can to pick, and it took an awful long time. And he had a pail there with some kerosene in it. He put the potato bugs in there, a little kerosene, and that kind of did the business to them. And then afterwards, he'd set fire to them, and there were no more potato bugs. And I got thinking at 8 years old that it was worth a lot more than a nickel. So I filled my can just about half full of mud. And when I got over to the can, I'd holler, "Grandpa," and he'd look up, shake his head, and take his book out, knock down another can for me with another nickel. Evidently, I wasn't too smart. 8 years old. Because it wasn't long before he worked himself towards the pail, and then I hollered, "Grandpa." He nodded, and he came over and he took my can. And he saw all the half the mud in there. He just took me by the hand over by the tree, took off his belt, and gave me the worst strapping I ever had in my life. Naturally, he cried, because it hurt. And he told me, he says, "When you work and get paid for a man," you do the work you're supposed to do. He says, "You didn't have to work here. You could have stayed home. When you came down here, you worked. You got 5 cents a can." I remember that. To this day, I've given an honest day's work wherever I went. And it paid off. Now, I could tell you a lot of episodes about how Raleigh Lace and I would get down to Murder Creek, catch a big snapping turtle, about that big, tie a rope around its tail, and oh man, when you look at those teeth and everything in that head, you knew you were going to lose a finger or toe if you got near him. We'd drag that up to the Akron hotel, knock on the back door, and I sure made a mistake because I told Spike Sabaki once that Charlie Humphrey gave me $2, and he says he never gave you $2 for a turtle, not Charlie Humphrey. I said, "I guess he did, and I think it must have been a quarter." But it seemed like $2. Well, I can tell you where the quarter went. Raleigh Lace and I went almost next door to John's Candy Kitchen, and we bought enough candy to last us for a couple of days for 25 cents. And I remember when the epidemic was here, when they carried John's partner down. He lived across the street upstairs. He died of the epidemic. Everybody had masks, and they carried him down. That was a sad day for John. I couldn't have been too old. Us kids had camphorated sacks we wore around our neck to ward off the flu or the typhoid or whatever it was, and you had to sleep with them, and boy, oh boy, what a smell. That, and you were rubbed with goose grease, and my grandmother had bear grease. The bear grease was used for greasing the axles. The funerals were in a hearse with a horse-drawn carriage. The funeral parlor was, I believe his name was Shed, if I'm not mistaken. Shed. The man, the preacher who preached the sermon for the death of my grandfather, Twin, was named Shed, S-H-E-D-D. And a few years later, I went to his church, the First Methodist Episcopal Church in OAM. And he was a drunk. But I can still see him standing next to the casket. My grandfather at that time was 32nd degree Mason. And he kind of practiced Mason. But he was a great man, and he built most of the houses in Akron, and I know him to build 3 houses, different kinds, with never a blueprint and everything out of his head. Every screw, every slot in the screw had to be either this way or this way, and none of them were anyway. He could almost measure. He was a master craftsman, a genius. He could do anything. On rainy days, he would straighten nails, he saved tin foil, and he saved string. He was the most thrifty person and very kind. My grandfather Krigo, he wasn't as thrifty, but he was all right. He bought me my first pair of boots. And my grandfather Twin promised me that I could have his tools when he died. Of course, none of us ever amounted to a tinker's hand as a carpenter or anything else, but he could build anything. And when I asked my uncle for my tools, he says, they belong to me. He says, you wouldn't have any use for them. So I didn't get any tools. And there was a few other things that was of importance. Gosh, I remember the night the button factory broke. I was scared. I was in bed. I got up and I had to come downstairs. My grandfather came in. I sat on his lap. Oh, he was something else. He'd say, "You like your grandpa?" I'd say, "You know." He said, "You know, someday they're going to put your grandpa in a big hole." Oh, cry. My mother, I'd start screaming. My mother would run. She said, "What did you do to him, Pa?" And he said, "Nothing." He'd laugh and he'd get up and walk away. I'd run over my grandmother and I'd say, "Ma, he said he's going to die." And oh, she'd get mad at my grandfather. Now, if there's anything you'd like that I can tell you about Akron or Kriegel Road or the Kriegel family, the only thing I can say, I think that I'm the last one. I know I won't be buried here, but my both brothers are buried here. One was killed in the service of World War II in Europe. The other one died as a result of the war. And my grandparents and grandmothers, my grandparents, parents are buried over there. And my Clark Twin, original Clark Twin, who was a doctor, lived on Cedar Street, married a Howard woman. He's buried over there in the cemetery. Let's see. He was my grandfather's brother. My uncle, mother's brother's name was Clark, and it all derived from the Octagon House, Clark. There was a lot of intermarriage. As I said before, when you're around 180 years or so, you've got to be almost a relative of anybody. But it was a wonderful life in Akron. Between the candy kitchen, the park theater, the basketball games that were played in the park theater, that was the high school gymnasium. Going to school. Oh, one other thing. Years later in Buffalo, old Indian. He heard my name. He came up to me and he says, "Rico?" Yes, sir. "What boy?" I hadn't heard Sport Creole's name. That was my father's nickname. Behind the check up. You know, he says, "Your dad," he says, "your father," and he says, "My kids went to grammar school together." He says, "I used to go over there and watch them. Lunchtime," he said, "and they got out of school for lunch, and he said, they used to play follow the leader." He said, "Rain or snow," he said, "there was hardly ever a day those kids didn't go back into school all sorts of like they used to jump rocks on the creek, so there had to be a creek, and they'd follow the leader." And he said, just about everybody fell in the creek. And the teacher naturally was really put out about it. Another game they used to play across the street here, had the radiators, and during the lunch times, the Indian kids used to sit on those red hot radiators, and the one that could stay there the longest he was the champ. And they would holler and squirm and scream, and a lot of them really got burnt, but they wouldn't get off there. They'd sit on those radiators and rip their pants. Now, if any of you people want to know anything that I could possibly give you any information about, all I can say is that Grego family was here for good military, Grego Road, all one of the little items. On the end of Grego Road was a grocery store, and it sold everything. Well, Louis Schnell. Now, mind you that I was only a little kite when this was going on, but I climbed to the top of that horse barn and painted. And I don't know why, but my mother and we were never allowed to worry about kids once they started to grow, because you either made it or you didn't. You couldn't. It's hard to tell a mother, and she was really. But that was the understanding, because we were all. There wasn't anything like a boyhood or playtime much. I always had something to do, and you almost went from a child to a man. But while going out there and helping painting the farm, the barns and everything, the house, I learned to paint very early in life. Spindles first, the most monotonous thing I ever did in my life. We stopped, my father and I and my brother stopped at this Louis Schnell's general store. Louis Schnell was such a nice man, but he was all crippled up. He walked something, he was like this. And I asked my father, I said, Pa, I says, what happened to Mr. Snell? He said, before he was born, a woman put a curse on his mother. Said that she was going to give birth to a spider. Of course, that's only and I said, oh gosh. But and there was a man there by the name of Kopi. He was deaf. But he had the most beautiful voice you've ever heard. My father was very musically inclined, and Louis Schnell had an organ in the back of his store, a pump organ with stoppers and everything. And so Louis, evidently, he was an old man then, and my father was born in 1888, I believe. So when he'd been a mere boy on Grego Road, I suppose the candy counter got a little bit of business from him. But anyways, he must have been an awful good man, and my father must have liked him very much. But my father would go in there, and he'd say, George, play the organ. And he'd go and send for Kopi. Kopi couldn't hear, but he had the most beautiful voice, and he had a trumpet, and he'd holler into his ear what song he was going to play. He'd start singing, and my father would play from here, the organ. He'd sit there and listen, and he'd play for probably an hour. And he'd say the next song. Louis Schnell would sit there and just love that music. A lady came in the store. She had a sunbonnet on that was way out. Old lady, her gingham dress was way down the floor. And Louis Schnell went in to wait on her, and he came back to George. He says, talk to me. I was sitting at the organ. We couldn't see who was in the store. We went in there, and naturally being all eyes, why, I had to go in there too. But I didn't go in right away because my father probably chased me back. None of your business in here. Anyways, I couldn't understand what they were talking about. I listened and listened and listened. On the way home, Pa never called his dad. Pa, you know, who was that lady? What lady? In the story, Pa. Always this trouble with she was. Gosh, she's an old lady, wasn't she? He says, you know, she hasn't been over to, she's born and raised there all her life and hasn't been into the village of Akron over twice in her life. And I says, gee, what were you talking about? Gaelic. I never knew my father was talking Gaelic to her. She was talking Gaelic to him. thing I ever said. Another strange thing that happened to my father, of course, I hope this isn't boring. My father was a very skeptical person. He was, we had a chance to play John Meal. He was quite a baseball fanatic, and my father played for Oneonta College when he went to school. He later became a superintendent of schools. And he played for Oneonta College baseball, and he came home. My grandmother had sacrificed quite a few things for my father to go to school. He left home when he was 15, came up to the village and lived with his grandfather George, who lived in the village, and slept under a bare rug. And went to school, swept up Barney Higgins' saloon. Barney Higgins feed him and give him spending money, give him lunch and whatever he wanted, let him hang around. He went to Oneonta College and he played baseball. He was a pretty good baseball player, not the best, but he was an awful good catcher. Came home one time and says, "Mother," he says, "I've got a chance to go play with Albany baseball." She just stood there in tears for $25 a week. He had just finished in college and he was offered $7 a week to teach school. Here's what tears do. But one other item of interest. A few times I went back to Snell's, but I could never find out any information on the people. Because they were all, some of them lived in orchards, log cabins. I never asked, really, and I never knew anything more about it. I never knew the lady's name, and I know she had lived too long. She grew old then. But there's 1,000 other things I could tell you, but I'm very person. But it just meant that Akron was a very nice place. Nice band concerts. There was a Blue Bottom swimming hole, and there was Demon's Bowl, and that's for hunting, fishing. You learned all that stuff before you were 12 years old. How to handle a rifle. I used to shoot woodchucks for 25 cents a piece, and that was quite a lot of money. Well, I guess that's about all. People want to ask me anything.
Thank you, now.
Concludes our part of the program. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, John, for your presentation, and thank you doubly for bringing Mr. Kriegel over today. We appreciate this very much. Is there anything that anyone would like to ask before we turn to the business part of the program? Okay. We have the minutes from the last board meeting. We'd like to have the minutes of the board meeting read so you can see what's been going on the last month or so.
These are in my writing as well. This was a meeting on October 2nd at the Akron House. Everyone was present. Minutes were read. Treasurer reported that the community fund drive as of October 2nd had collected $1,009. This is on the letters that we sent out right at the end of September, the first part of October. Frank Chung and John Palmer had reported that we have signs, we have purchased signs for the Century Home Project. Tom Jumper reported a total membership of 356 in the society. There was a report by Dave Wakeman on nominations. There was a committee meeting planned for 1982-83 program suggestions. And if any of you have suggestions, please see Gene Palmer about any suggestions we have for future meetings. One of the suggestions was a lawn fade as a fundraiser program. We have ordered note paper and tiles to replace our depleted sales items. Octagon House supports fundraising. I reported on the progress of the mailing of the youth business and the community letters. Dave Wakeman suggested an auction of the Octagon items that were not going to be used in the house and donated items for fundraising. I reported on the open house plan for October 11th. Jim Stapleton reported on the renovation. At that time, the jacking had not yet commenced, and he suggested another important job before we started to get cold weather would be to tile around the basement area of the Octagon house. And if any of you are good pick and shovel people, we've got to get under the porch there and dig. We're going to need some engineering and surveying help along with that. Museum, I was suggested by Sally McLeod that we combine both the museum functions and furnishings, at least for the time being. And we adjourned about 10:15 in there. So that was a report from the last board meeting. President Treasurer's report. I'm going to get it all on here. On the community fund drive to date, we have contributions of $1,540. During the course of the business, we have separated, we voted at the board of directors meeting to separate our general fund from the Akron House Fund. In total, both the general fund and the Akron House Fund have $14,026 that we have raised, a combination of the previous donations and our current donations. And that's the treasurer's report for this point.
Any questions concerning the minutes or the treasurer's report? If not, they'll stand approved. I'll go through these committees rather hurriedly. Acquisitions will appear in the next newsletter. Acquisitions we received. This, of course, does not include the inventory from the Octagon House. John, did you want to say anything concerning the Century Homes project?
Yeah, farms here, things like
Application for Century Home Flat?
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Some people have asked if we were charging, what we were charging for these plaques, and the board has not set any price for the plaques. However, they do want it known that they do cost $10 a piece approximately. If anyone wants to make a donation, that's acceptable, but the board at this point has not decided to charge. And we are going to, are we giving out the first one Sunday afternoon, John? Okay. Will the new ones be ready, Frank? Sunday? No. Well, we can use that prototype that we had. It was a little larger than the one we're going to really use. Anything new on membership, Tom? Still about 350 some members. Yes, and you're accepting dues tonight, are you? Okay. The dues are $1 for junior members, $3 for an individual, and $5 for a couple. Any thing on the newsletter, Jim? Will it be out next week, you think? Okay. The third newsletter for this year has been delayed a few months because of the work on the Octagon House. As many of you know, Jim spends most of his time there, I think. I don't know whether his wife has she said that too or not. But he's been there a great deal working, and we'll have more to say about that later. The program next month, November, is the annual meeting. We have no special speaker because we're going to have a number of speakers. There'll be the annual report from the different officers and committee chairmen, and then the election of officers. And then the program also suggests that there will be an open forum for the good of the society. In other words, the members who are not members of the board will have an opportunity to bring forth their ideas. What about sales items, Eileen? Tiles are being bought from a new company, and we have to wait until we get them before we're sure what the price will be. But you may be sure that the price of the tiles and the note paper is going to be considerably more than they were in the past, because it's been a few years since we bought any of the other supply, which is all gone, and new supplies are costing considerably more than they used to. Well, now let's turn to the Octagon House restoration. You heard some items in the minutes. Jim, did you have, as coordinator for the restoration, do you have any report to make at all to us?
Well, not too much. The two of the inventory and materials have been moved to a warehouse. We're cleaning the house up now for the open house on Sunday. And we're waiting for the full train construction company to come and start stamping up.
Do we have any idea when they'll be coming?
All the sympathy for this week.
Yeah.
That will take quite a while, several months.
All right. Is there anything more on fundraising, John?
Just a note, if any of you see friends or have friends who are former Akronites who happen to be living elsewhere in the country who you think would be interested perhaps in donating to the Akron House, we have come up with all kinds of names for people we had never even thought of and going through the local families. Please let me know, because we have in our membership and in our membership drive, we got checks virtually from all over the country, British and a couple other countries as well. So if you have friends or relatives or whatever who might be interested in donating, please let me know, or somebody, Marilyn Perry, or anybody, Jim Stapleton, let them know who they are, and if you have an address, give them a call, so that perhaps we could send them a letter. And we'd like to have not only current community people, but people who come visit us. You know, some of the people who have been most interested in the house are people who have come from out of town and said, gee, we're only going to be here a day or two, could we please walk with the Octagon House? We tried to make arrangements where we could do that for people. So if you do have people come to visit, and they're only going to be here a couple of days, and you think they might have an extra few dollars they'd like to donate to the house, we sure as heck like to take them through the house. So please let us know if we can do that for you, okay?
I think at this time I ought to thank not only the members, but the many people who aren't here too, for the way you've been supporting this fundraising effort. We've had not only checks coming in, and they're coming in every day, but we've had people come to us and say, "What can we? Is it all right if we have an auction in their own organization?" Or, by the way, do you know that a certain organization in this town raises a lot of money every year, and they've been giving it to another organization outside of town that really don't need it? They're well endowed. At least they don't need it as much as the Octagon House does. And so we're going to contact those people. So if you have any ideas like that, where people may give through an activity like one of their little auctions, or making use of one of their fundraising drives of their own, or giving time or materials. Cold Spring Construction, for instance, is giving their services to the jacking up of and leveling of the Octagon House. And by the way, Jim, Andy Papadino is our consulting engineer, and he's engineer with the Cold Spring Construction Company. Sally McLeod couldn't come tonight. She had to go to the hospital because of an injury to a relative. She thought she might be back by now, but I see she isn't. And I guess you've probably been told what she might have said anyway, that some of the items that are in storage are not suitable for the museum or for the Octagon House, and will be sold. There'll be more information on that later. And eventually, of course, there'll be a project for reconditioning and the furniture and so on. But that'll come a little later. Are there any questions on any of these items concerning the Octagon House? 3 years ago, we had a meeting in this room of about 50 people who were interested in the project of getting a museum, either obtaining a museum in town other than the Octagon House, or getting the Octagon House and paying for it. And we thought we should have a fundraising chairman and a secretary and a treasurer, separate from the officers of the society. That is to say, the secretary would be a different person from the society secretary, treasurer would be a separate person, and so on. And with that in mind, Peter Forrestal at the bank has been asked to be the fundraising treasurer. That's not to take the place of the work that Don has been doing, but to receive the money and pay the checks out. Of course, Don has been paying the checks out too, but he's also treasurer of the society, and it'll cut down on the amount of work that Don has had to do, because there's been a lot to it, running the fundraising and so on. Oh, now we have a special committee to report. Dave Wakeman is chairman of the nominating committee. Dave, will you report?
As long as I've got to stand up, is it all right to make a public service announcement?
Oh, sure, go ahead.
I don't know how many people you know Dee Wright. Probably quite a few you do. But he's been scoutmaster for one of the troops in Akron for 35 years. And we're having a recognition dinner on November 1st at the Akron Fire Hall. It's $6 a person. It's going to be catered. It's going to be at 6:30 in the evening. Tickets are available at the Village Hall, Town Hall, plus the On the nominating committee, myself and 3 other members met at my house. Some of them are the same. There's 2 or 3 changes. The president, Ellsworth, has accepted again. Vice president and program chairman is going to be Donnie Freeman. I think program chairman sort of scares people. As far as vice president, it's running the meetings, bringing people in the evenings, and not that much. Program chairman is the program for the year, which 6 of the 12 meetings are usually pre-planned or meetings that are an annual meeting, the picnics, Christmas party, 4th of July. So you only have a half a dozen meetings that you have to come up with. And there was a committee that met for that. And usually there's different people that have different ideas. So this coming year is they can pair around. Dolly's going to be the vice president, or this Dolly should be nominated for vice president, program chairman. Tom Jumper is going to be the membership chairman. Secretary is Gene Palmer, and treasurer is Don Shaw again. 2 trustees for 1984 that expired this year. I don't know, well, they didn't expire. They were up for 3 years. Great. From now to 1984 is Lucille Weaver and Jim Stapleton. And something that we've talked over, the membership committee would like to recommend that we have 3 more trustees. There is quite a bit of work, more work being involved than there has been in the past. Really, work the Akron House. And what we would have next month is 1 person for 1 year, another person for 2 years, and another person for 3 years.
You make that as a motion, David?
Yeah, I would make that motion. We have 3 more.
Approve.
Any discussion? It might require an amendment of the bylaws. It does, I don't know.
There is no limit. Well, there's no limit in the bylaws on the number of trustees. There is a limit in our charter, our state charter, and the state charter limits us to 25 trustees. So we would still be well within the limit. You've heard the motion and the second thing. Are there any other questions? All in favor of the nominating committee considering 3 more trustees and approving this action, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay. So will you continue then to work?
We will meet again and we'll have a complete slate.
Right.
For the annual meeting.
Right. And now at the annual meeting next month, there'll be an opportunity for nominations from the floor besides the slate that has been given by the nominating committee. Is there any other business to come before this meeting?
Alderman, I'd like to ask one question. I forgot this. If you started at the foot of Milk Street years ago in Akron and went to Albert Street and then to Clough Street and went to the end of Cement Street, where would you start and where would you end? Where would you start?
You started on Milk Street?
Milk Street.
Well, that would be where the creamery was, wasn't
That would
it?
be the foot of Boyd Avenue. Then Albert Street ran from where Parkview Drive is up to the foot of Cummings Hill, and then Clough Street went to Liberty Street, and then Cement Street went the rest of the way.
To Falkirk, as he said. And of course, that goes back 2 years. Right. Yes, Al.
Do we have an official time now that the meeting starts at 7:30?
This year, the meeting starts at 7:30, and
The vehicle's at 8 o'clock.
Oh, the Bugle did? Oh, okay. This is something we'll want to take up at our annual meeting next month, whether you want to continue 7:30 or go back to 8 o'clock. We hadn't used 8 o'clock for years. Frank, did you have a request at all? I should have seen you. You came in late, and I didn't get a chance to talk to you. Someone said that you might want a meeting of the committee, executive committee. Frank Jones.
Well, last weekend, I was informed that the condition of Akron is a little bit too risky. That's too many people in at one time.
Yeah.
I do not know whether that condition is still prevailing for the open house, or is it corrected, or what?
Well, there are some problems relative to having a large crowd go through at any one time. We just can't do that. We'll have to limit the number of people going through. Also, we'll have to limit where they go. Now, the floor in the basement has rotted out and has been removed down to the concrete, and it's irregular. Some places where it hasn't been removed, and some have. Is it still that way, Jim? And Jim feels real bad about this because he wanted to show off that fireplace and the oven in the kitchen. But well, we'll see what happens the rest of the week, whether we can let people in that lower level or not. And then it was felt by the insurance underwriter that we ought not to let people up into the cupola. There's no guardrail up there, and people could get up there and fall down the stairway. And those are two of the hazardous places. But I think if we can limit the groups to small numbers, like 5 going in at a time, not 50 at a time, it may be all right.
But there's another hazard that might endanger the safety.
There might have been a possibility of some plaster falling. Of course, much of the plaster fell 2 years ago. That was going to fall. You know, the pipes broke and knocked on the plaster. But as I understand it, Jim, wherever you have found any plaster that seems in the least bit loose, you've been doing what? Today. I really think it's not going to be that heavy.
Well, that's all my question was, but as a question, I think we should do something about it now.
Is there any other business?
I'm working on an auction. I don't know how to say this because it's very preliminary. There's not too much information got on it yet. But Sally will probably be back here. There are quite a few things that can be used to restore the Octagon House in a period, around 1880?
Well, 1849,
1840,
80, modern.
There's quite a few things that are modern that wouldn't fit into the decor, some appliances, things that you couldn't use to restore it to that period of time. There's a lot of things that are broken, chairs, several things that can't be used. So what we were thinking about doing was having an auction. This would be an auction to sell the things that can't be used, that's been inventory. And also use it as a fundraising. Anybody that has anything that is serviceable that they want to get rid of, to donate it to a fundraising auction. It could be anywhere from TVs, appliances, chairs, games. It could be now. You can have produce, baked goods, anything on that line. I started this week, I talked to Newstead Fire Department to use their facility. Any facility that's available usually goes up a month or 2 months in advance. October is fall, November is fall. The earliest date you could get would be first part of December. Then you get into holiday dinners at these, as I held at these different fire halls. As of right now, that's not all I can say, but possibly after we have another meeting, we come up with a date, and this would be advertised in the